July 7th, 2011, 11:30 a.m. A 24-year-old man walks out of a psychiatric hospital in Adelaide, Australia. Security cameras capture him leaving through the main entrance. He's wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He turns left on the sidewalk, and then he's gone. For 7 years, his family searched. Police investigated. Media coverage spread across the continent. But Simon Kadwell had vanished without a trace. Until September 2018, when a discovery just 3 kilometers from that hospital entrance would shock investigators, devastate a family, and raise disturbing questions about how someone could disappear so close to where they were last seen. This is one of the most haunting cases in South Australian history. This is the story of Simon Kadwell, a young man whose disappearance baffled authorities and tormented his loved ones for 7 long years. What happened during those final moments after he left the hospital? How could someone vanish in broad daylight in a populated area? And why did it take so long to find answers that were hiding in plain sight? The investigation would reveal failures, oversights, and a tragedy that should never have happened. Before we dive deeper into this investigation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. New investigations every week. Simon Kadwell was born in 1987 in Adelaide, South Australia. He grew up in a loving family with his mother, Triana, his father, and siblings. Those who knew Simon described him as intelligent, kind-hearted, and creative. He had dreams of working in the film industry and showed genuine talent for visual storytelling. But like many young people, Simon faced challenges. In his late teens and early 20s, he began struggling with mental health issues. His family noticed changes in his behavior: mood swings, withdrawal, periods of confusion. By 2011, when Simon was 24 years old, his condition had deteriorated to the point where professional help became necessary. In early July 2011, Simon was admitted to Glenside Hospital, a psychiatric facility in the Adelaide suburb of Glenside. The hospital had been treating patients with mental health conditions for decades. It was supposed to be a safe place, a place where Simon could receive the care and support he desperately needed. His family trusted the facility to look after their son. They believed he was in good hands. They had no idea that within days of his admission, Simon would walk out of the hospital and never be seen alive again. July 7th, 2011, started like any other day at Glenside Hospital. Simon had been there for several days, undergoing treatment and evaluation. According to hospital records, he was being monitored, but he was not under constant supervision. At approximately 11:30 that morning, Simon walked out of the facility. He didn't sign out. He didn't tell staff members where he was going. He simply left through the main entrance. Security footage captured him exiting the building, turning left onto the street, and walking away. The footage shows him moving at a normal pace. He doesn't appear agitated or panicked. He just walks away. That was the last confirmed sighting of Simon Kadwell. When staff at Glenside Hospital realized Simon was missing, they contacted his family. Triana Kadwell received the phone call every parent dreads. Her son had left the hospital and hadn't returned. She immediately drove to the facility, hoping to find him nearby. She searched the surrounding streets calling his name, checking parks and bus stops. Nothing. By evening, she contacted South Australia Police to report Simon missing. An official investigation began, but in those crucial first hours, precious time had already been lost. Police launched a missing persons investigation. They reviewed the security footage showing Simon leaving the hospital. They interviewed hospital staff to understand his state of mind and whether he had mentioned any plans or destinations. They spoke with his family and friends to learn if he had contacted anyone or if there were places he might have gone. The search expanded to include the neighborhoods surrounding Glenside Hospital. Officers walked the streets Simon might have taken. They checked bus stations, train platforms, shopping centers. They distributed missing person flyers with Simon's photograph and description. But as days turned into weeks, there were no credible sightings, no phone calls, no credit card activity. Simon Kadwell had seemingly vanished into thin air. The investigation revealed something troubling. Glenside Hospital had protocols in place for patients who were considered at risk of leaving the facility, but Simon had not been classified as requiring that level of security. Questions began to surface. Should Simon have been allowed to leave so easily? Were proper risk assessments conducted? Had warning signs been missed? His family was devastated and confused. How could their son simply walk out of a psychiatric hospital without anyone stopping him or immediately noticing he was gone? These questions would haunt them for years. Media coverage of Simon's disappearance spread across Adelaide and throughout South Australia. Television news programs featured his story. Newspapers printed appeals from his family. Social media campaigns were launched to keep his face in the public consciousness. Simon Kadwell became a tireless advocate, appearing at press conferences, organizing search parties, and refusing to let her son's case fade from public attention. She held out hope that Simon was alive somewhere, perhaps confused, perhaps unable to find his way home. She believed that with enough publicity, someone would recognize him and help bring him back. As months passed, the case grew colder. Police continued to follow up on reported sightings, but none led to Simon. Some people claimed to have seen a young man matching his description in various parts of Adelaide. Others reported sightings in different cities across Australia. Each lead was investigated and each one led nowhere. Theories began to emerge. Had Simon intentionally disappeared to start a new life? Had he suffered an accident and was unable to identify himself? Had he fallen victim to foul play? Without evidence, investigators couldn't determine what had happened after Simon left that hospital. The family marked painful milestones. Simon's 25th birthday came and went, then his 26th, then his 27th. Each year, Trayana held vigils and memorial walks, keeping her son's name alive. She worked with mental health advocacy groups, speaking about the need for better care and supervision of vulnerable patients. She transformed her grief into action, determined that Simon's disappearance would mean something, that it would lead to changes that could prevent similar tragedies. But despite all her efforts, despite the ongoing police investigation, despite the media coverage, Simon remained missing. By 2015, 4 years after Simon's disappearance, the case was officially classified as a long-term missing person investigation. Police had exhausted most active leads. The file remained open, and investigators would still follow up on any new information, but resources were limited. The harsh reality was that without new evidence or a credible sighting, there was little more they could do. Trayana refused to give up. She maintained a website dedicated to finding Simon. She posted regularly on social media. She contacted psychics, joined online missing persons groups, and reached out to anyone who might offer help or information. Her determination never wavered, but with each passing year, hope became harder to hold on to. Then came September 2018, 7 years and 2 months after Simon Kadwell walked out of Glenside Hospital. 7 years of searching, wondering, hoping, and suffering. 7 years of a family torn apart by not knowing. A member of the public was walking in an area of bushland near the Adelaide suburb of Eastwood, just 3 kilometers from Glenside Hospital. The area was known for walking trails and natural vegetation, but it was also close enough to residential areas that people passed through it regularly. The person noticed something unusual partially hidden in the undergrowth. Closer inspection revealed what appeared to be human remains. Emergency services were immediately contacted. South Australia police arrived at the scene along with forensic investigators. The location was secured and a careful examination of the area began. The remains were skeletal, indicating they had been there for a considerable time. Personal items were found near the body, including clothing and identification. The clothing matched the description of what Simon had been wearing when he disappeared: gray hoodie and jeans. The ID confirmed what investigators feared. The remains were those of Simon Kadwell. He had been just 3 kilometers from the hospital all along. 3 kilometers. Less than a 40-minute walk. An area that had been searched multiple times during the initial investigation. But somehow, Simon's body had remained undiscovered for 7 years. Forensic pathologists conducted an autopsy to determine cause of death. The examination revealed no signs of foul play, no evidence of trauma, no indication that another person had been involved. The location of the remains, the condition of the body, and the evidence at the scene all pointed to a tragic conclusion. After leaving Glenside Hospital on July 7, 2011, Simon had walked to this area of bushland. What happened next cannot be known with absolute certainty, but the evidence suggested that Simon, struggling with his mental health condition and possibly disoriented, had either collapsed or suffered a medical event. The area where he was found was somewhat concealed by vegetation, which explained why searchers had missed him despite walking nearby. The news devastated Simon's family. For 7 years, Traiana had held on to hope that her son was alive somewhere. That hope, as painful as the uncertainty was, had kept her going. Now she had to face the unbearable truth. Simon had died shortly after leaving the hospital, and he had been so close all along. The grief was overwhelming, but it came with a terrible new burden. For 7 years, Simon's body had lain undiscovered just 3 kilometers from where he was last seen. 7 years during which he could have been found, during which the family could have had answers, during which they could have laid him to rest. The thought of those lost years, of Simon lying there while they searched elsewhere, was almost too much to bear. Questions erupted in the media and from the community. How had Simon's body remained undiscovered for 7 years when he was so close to the hospital? Had the initial search been inadequate? Were there failures in how the case was handled? South Australia police defended their investigation, stating that the area had been searched in the days and weeks following Simon's disappearance. They explained that the density of vegetation and the specific location where Simon's body was found made discovery difficult. They acknowledged, however, that with hindsight, perhaps more intensive searches of the immediate area should have been conducted. Glenside Hospital also faced scrutiny. An internal review was conducted to examine the circumstances of Simon's disappearance from the facility. The review found that while protocols existed for managing patients at risk of absconding, Simon had not been identified as high risk at the time. However, questions remained about whether his mental state had been properly assessed and whether adequate supervision was in place. Changes were recommended to improve patient safety and monitoring, but for Simon's family, these changes came too late. Their son was gone, and no policy adjustment could bring him back. A coroner's inquest was held to formally investigate the circumstances of Simon's death. The inquest heard testimony from hospital staff, police officers involved in the search, forensic experts, and Simon's family members. Simon Kadwell gave emotional testimony about her son, his struggles with mental health, and the 7-year nightmare of not knowing what had happened to him. She spoke about the failures she perceived in the system, the inadequate search efforts, and the need for accountability. The inquest examined every aspect of the case, from Simon's treatment at the hospital to the police investigation to the eventual discovery of his remains. The coroner's findings were sobering. The official cause of death was determined to be exposure to the elements, likely occurring within days of Simon leaving the hospital. His mental health condition had likely contributed to disorientation and poor decision-making. The coroner criticized aspects of both the hospital's care and the police search efforts, while acknowledging that no single failure could be identified as the sole cause of this tragedy. Recommendations were made to improve protocols at psychiatric facilities and to enhance search procedures for vulnerable missing persons. The coroner expressed sympathy for Simon's family and recognized their suffering throughout the ordeal. Simon Kadwell was finally laid to rest by his family in a private ceremony. After 7 years of uncertainty, they could at least have closure in this one respect. Traiana established a memorial foundation in Simon's name, focused on improving mental health care and support for families of missing persons. She continues to speak publicly about her experience, advocating for changes in how vulnerable patients are cared for and how missing person cases are investigated. She has said that while finding Simon's remains brought an end to the active search, it did not bring peace. The knowledge that he was so close all along, that he might have been found sooner, that he died alone in the bush within sight of the hospital, these realities haunt her still. The case of Simon Kadwell raises profound questions about mental health care, missing person investigations, and the vulnerabilities of those struggling with psychiatric conditions. How many safeguards need to be in place to prevent a patient from simply walking out of a hospital? How thorough must search efforts be when someone goes missing in an urban or semi-urban environment? What responsibility do institutions have to the patients in their care? These are not easy questions, and there are no simple answers. What is clear is that a young man who should have been protected was not. A young man who should have been found was not for 7 years. A family that deserved answers had to wait through 7 years of torment. Simon's story is also a reminder of the human cost behind missing person statistics. He was not just a case number. He was a son, a brother, a person with dreams and potential. His disappearance affected dozens of people who loved him, who searched for him, who never gave up hope. The discovery of his remains brought the worst possible answer to their prayers, but at least it was an answer. Some families never get even that. Some cases remain unsolved forever. In that sense, as painful as the truth was, the Kadwell family at least knows what happened to Simon. They can visit his grave. They can remember him not as a mystery, but as a person who lived and who is mourned. Today, Glenside Hospital has implemented stricter protocols for monitoring patients who may be at risk of leaving the facility without authorization. South Australia police have reviewed their procedures for searching for vulnerable missing persons, with particular emphasis on thorough coverage of areas immediately surrounding the last known location. Mental health advocacy groups in Adelaide have used Simon's case as a rallying point for better funding and improved care standards. These changes are small consolation for a family that lost their son, but they represent hope that future tragedies might be prevented, that other families might not have to endure 7 years of not knowing, that other young people struggling with mental health issues might receive the protection and care they need. The area where Simon's body was found is now marked by a small memorial placed by his family. People still walk the trails through that bushland, often unaware of the tragedy that occurred there. But those who do know, those who remember Simon's story, pause at that spot. They think about how close he was to safety and help. They think about how differently things might have turned out if he had been found that first day, or that first week. They think about a mother who searched for 7 years while her son lay just 3 kilometers from where his nightmare began. If you have been affected by this case, or if you know someone struggling with mental health issues, please reach out for help. In Australia, services like Lifeline and Beyond Blue offer support 24 hours a day. In other countries, similar crisis helplines exist. Mental health struggles are not a sign of weakness. They are medical conditions that require treatment and support. Simon Kadwell needed help, and the systems in place to protect him failed. We owe it to his memory to ensure those systems improve, to ensure that vulnerable people receive the care they deserve, and to ensure that families like the Kadwells never have to endure such prolonged suffering. Simon's case also highlights the importance of thorough, immediate, and intensive search efforts when someone goes missing, particularly someone who may be vulnerable due to mental health conditions, age, or other factors. The first 24 to 48 hours are critical. Resources should be mobilized quickly. Search areas should be methodically covered, not just casually surveyed. Technology like drones, thermal imaging, and coordinated volunteer search teams can make the difference between finding someone alive and finding them too late, or not at all. In Simon's case, he was found 7 years too late, but he was also just 3 kilometers away. That proximity should haunt everyone involved in missing person investigations. It should serve as a wake-up call about the need for diligence, thoroughness, and urgency. The Kadwell family's advocacy work has brought attention to the broader issue of people who go missing from medical facilities. A review of cases across Australia revealed that patients with mental health conditions leaving hospitals without authorization is more common than many people realize. Most return safely or are found quickly, but not all. The question becomes, what duty of care do these facilities owe to patients who may not have the capacity to make safe decisions for themselves? Should patients in psychiatric crisis be able to simply walk out the door? Should there be locked wards and more restrictive measures? These questions balance patient rights with patient safety, autonomy with protection. There are valid arguments on all sides, but Simon's death illustrates the potential consequences when safety measures are insufficient. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? Should hospitals have stricter protocols for patients with mental health conditions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. 7 years. That number echoes throughout this case. 7 years of searching, 7 years of hope and despair, 7 years of a body lying undiscovered while a family tore themselves apart looking for answers. 7 years that could have been shortened to days if the initial search had been more intensive, if the area had been more thoroughly covered, if just one person had looked in the right spot at the right time. The tragic irony is that Simon never made it far from the hospital. He never traveled to another city or disappeared into the wilderness miles from civilization. He was there just 3 kilometers away the entire time. This case serves as a stark reminder that missing persons are often closer than we think, that searches should focus intensively on the immediate area before expanding outward, that assumptions about where someone might go can be wrong, that every square meter matters. Simon Kadwell did not vanish into thin air. He died of exposure in a patch of bushland within sight of the facility where he had been seeking help. That reality is almost too cruel to comprehend, but it is the reality. And it is a reality that his family must live with every single day. The coroner's report noted that Simon likely died within 48 to 72 hours of leaving the hospital. That means there was a window, a brief window, during which he could have been found alive. If the search had been faster, if resources had been deployed more effectively, if the right area had been checked at the right time, Simon might have been rescued. He might have received the help he needed. He might be alive today. These what-ifs torture his family. They torture everyone who cares about preventing such tragedies, because this was preventable. Maybe not easily, maybe not with any single intervention, but with better systems, better protocols, better searches, Simon Kadwell might not have died alone in the bush at age 24. The investigation into Simon's death also revealed gaps in coordination between the hospital and police. When Simon was first reported missing, there was confusion about who was responsible for what. The hospital expected police to conduct the search. Police expected the hospital to provide information about Simon's mental state and likely behavior. This lack of clear coordination may have contributed to delays and inadequacies in the initial response. Since Simon's case, efforts have been made to improve communication and establish clearer protocols for situations where a vulnerable patient goes missing from a medical facility. These are important steps, but they came too late for Simon. Simon's story is not unique, though each case has its own tragic details. Around the world, vulnerable people go missing every day. Some are found quickly, some are found too late, some are never found at all. Mental health conditions, dementia, developmental disabilities, substance abuse, trauma, all of these factors can make individuals particularly vulnerable when they become separated from support systems. Society has a responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Institutions that care for them have an even greater responsibility. When those protections fail, when those responsibilities are not met, tragedies like Simon's occur, and families are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Trayana Kadwell has said in interviews that she will never fully recover from losing Simon or from the 7 years of torture not knowing what happened to him. She describes the moment she learned Simon's remains had been found as both a relief and a fresh devastation. Relief because she finally knew. Devastation because the answer was the one she had feared most. She has also spoken about the guilt she feels, a guilt that is entirely undeserved, but nonetheless real. She wonders if she should have fought harder to keep Simon from being admitted to the hospital. She wonders if she should have been there that day, if somehow she could have prevented him from leaving. Rationally, she knows she could not have known. Emotionally, the guilt remains. This is the burden carried by families of missing persons, a burden that does not end even when answers are finally found. The location where Simon's body was discovered has been analyzed by search and rescue experts as a case study in what can go wrong during missing person searches. The area was not particularly remote. It was accessible. It had been identified as a possible location during the initial investigation. But the density of vegetation and the specific spot where Simon's body lay made visual detection difficult. Experts now suggest that in cases involving vulnerable missing persons, areas like this should be searched using systematic grid patterns, with multiple passes, and possibly with the aid of cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. These techniques were not fully employed in Simon's case, at least not in the crucial early days. The media coverage of Simon's disappearance and eventual discovery was extensive, but it also raised ethical questions. Some outlets focused sensationally on the failures of the hospital and police, sometimes at the expense of Simon's humanity. He became a symbol of systemic failure rather than a person who had suffered and died. Traiana has spoken about the pain of seeing her son's case used for headlines and clickbait, of having reporters show up at her door expecting fresh quotes for the news cycle. She understood the value of media attention in keeping Simon's case alive during those 7 years, but she also experienced the darker side of that attention, the exploitation, the lack of sensitivity, the intrusion into private grief. It is a balance that families of victims must navigate, wanting publicity to help find answers while also craving privacy to grieve. Simon Kadwell's case has been referenced in training materials for mental health professionals, search and rescue teams, and police investigators. It is taught as an example of what not to do, of what can happen when systems fail. That Simon's death might contribute to better training and ultimately save lives is perhaps the only positive legacy of this tragedy. But it is a legacy purchased at the highest price: a young man's life, a family's peace, 7 years of suffering. The question remains, will the lessons learned from Simon's case actually translate into meaningful change? Will future patients be better protected? Will future searches be more effective? Only time will tell. As we reflect on Simon's story, it is important to remember him not just as a victim of systemic failure, but as a person who existed, who had value, who was loved. He enjoyed filmmaking. He had a sense of humor. He cared about his family. He struggled with mental health issues, as millions of people do. Those struggles do not define him, but they did contribute to his vulnerability. They made him someone who needed extra care and protection. And when that care and protection failed, he paid with his life. His family paid with 7 years of torment. Society paid with the loss of a young man who might have recovered, who might have lived a full life, who might have contributed in countless ways. The final report from the coroner included 15 recommendations aimed at preventing similar tragedies. These recommendations covered hospital security protocols, risk assessment procedures, police search strategies, interagency communication, and family liaison practices. Some of these recommendations have been fully implemented. Others are still in progress. Some have been challenged or modified. Bureaucratic inertia and resource constraints often slow the pace of change. But advocates like Simon Kadwell continue to push, continue to speak out, continue to demand that her son's death means something, that it lead to real, substantive improvements. She has attended government hearings, met with hospital administrators, and collaborated with other families who have lost loved ones in similar circumstances. Her grief has been transformed into action, though the pain never lessens. If this case has affected you, if you have theories about what could have been done differently, or if you have experiences with mental health care that you want to share, please drop a comment below. Conversations matter. Awareness matters. Change happens when people speak up, when they refuse to accept that tragedies like Simon's are inevitable. They are not inevitable. They are preventable. But prevention requires vigilance, resources, training, and a genuine commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Today, Simon Kadwell rests in a cemetery in Adelaide. His grave is visited regularly by his mother, his family, and those who knew and loved him. The headstone bears his name, his dates, and a simple inscription chosen by Traiana. It reads, "Forever in our hearts, gone too soon." It is a sentiment shared by thousands of families who have lost loved ones to preventable tragedies. Simon should not have died at 24. He should not have spent his final hours or days alone in the bush, disoriented and unwell. He should have been found. He should have been helped. The fact that he was not found, that he lay there for 7 years just 3 kilometers from where his nightmare began, is a stain on the systems that were supposed to protect him. The case remains a touchstone in discussions about mental health care, missing persons protocols, and the duty of care owed to vulnerable individuals. It is cited in academic papers, debated in professional forums, and taught in university courses. Simon Kadwell's name has become known not because of what he accomplished in his too short life, but because of how he died and how his body remained undiscovered despite being so close. It is a bitter legacy, but if it leads to change, if it saves even one life, then perhaps something meaningful can emerge from this tragedy. Simon's case also highlights the importance of volunteer search efforts and community involvement in missing person cases. During those 7 years, hundreds of volunteers participated in organized searches. They walked through bushland, checked abandoned buildings, distributed flyers, and shared information on social media. Their efforts, though ultimately unsuccessful in finding Simon alive, demonstrated the power of community solidarity. They showed that people care, that they are willing to give their time and energy to help strangers in need. That spirit of community support is something that can be built upon, organized more effectively, and mobilized more quickly in future cases. The technological advances in search and rescue since 2011 are also worth noting. Drones with high-resolution cameras and thermal imaging can now cover large areas quickly. Cell phone tracking, when available, can narrow search zones. Social media can spread information instantaneously to millions of people. Databases and coordination software can help searchers avoid duplicating efforts and ensure thorough coverage. These tools were not available or not fully utilized in 2011. If Simon went missing today, would the outcome be different? It is impossible to say with certainty, but the likelihood of finding him quickly would be higher. That is small comfort to his family, but it offers hope for others. As we come to the end of this investigation, we are left with difficult emotions and unanswered questions. Not unanswered in the factual sense. We know what happened to Simon Kadwell. We know he left the hospital, walked to nearby bushland, and died of exposure. We know his body lay undiscovered for 7 years. We know the pain his family endured, but the deeper questions remain. How do we as a society better protect vulnerable individuals? How do we ensure that psychiatric facilities have adequate resources and protocols? How do we improve search efforts to maximize the chances of finding missing persons quickly? How do we support families through the nightmare of not knowing? These are questions that extend far beyond Simon's individual case. They are questions that every community must grapple with. Simon Kadwell was 24 years old when he died. He had his whole life ahead of him. He deserved better than to die alone in the bush. He deserved better than to lie undiscovered for 7 years. His family deserved better than 7 years of torture. We cannot change what happened to Simon. We cannot bring him back. But we can honor his memory by demanding better systems, better care, and better protections for those who are vulnerable. We can ensure that his case is not forgotten, that it continues to drive conversations and policy changes. We can make sure that Simon Kadwell's life and death mattered. If this case intrigued you, if it made you think, if it moved you, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth investigations into cases that deserve to be remembered. Hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have been done differently? What changes need to happen to prevent similar tragedies? Your voice matters. These aren't just stories. These are real people, real lives, and real tragedies that deserve our attention, our respect, and our commitment to doing better. Simon Kadwell's story is a reminder that behind every missing person case is a human being who was loved, who mattered, and who deserved to be found. Remember his name, remember his story, and remember that change is possible when we refuse to accept preventable tragedies as inevitable. Thank you for watching.